Welcome to USR Radio. This is Khalil Hashim with the Local Connections. Thank you for being with us. We have a great program for you today. This week, America was shaken by an attempted assassination on former President and GOP nominee Donald Trump. Thankfully, the president was not harmed, but other people rather died, including the alleged assassin. This incident comes at a time when the country is divided politically, and political violence is emerging and is becoming and becoming resurging, I want to say. And political rhetoric is intense. Some are resorting to political violence to make their points. Some experts say we are going to see more of it since the country is divided, while others warn that this is not unusual in America. We're going to be talking about this issue today, among other things. With us this morning is Dr. Brad Roth, Professor of Law and Political Science at Wayne State University. Good morning, Dr. Roth, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning, and thank you.
Absolutely. Were you surprised by the attempted assassination?
Well, maybe shocked but not surprised. As President Biden has referred to it, the temperature has been high in all of this. There is a sense on the part of a great many people across the society that the stakes of politics are very high, and therefore, if you think that the republic's future rides on what happens, there is a kind of impulse in this direction. I think it's important to note, though, from the get-go, that we really don't know anything about this gunman, Thomas Matthew Crooks, particularly with respect to political motivations. And we have a large number of events in our history where people have taken politically consequential decisions to engage in acts of violence, but they're not actually political acts. So if you look, for example, at John Hinckley having attempted to assassinate President Reagan, he was really doing it for a reason that was deeply rooted in his mental illness. And that was true one way or other for a large number of similar events. So we really need to withhold judgment about the specific meaning of this incident.
We've in America, we've had a history of presidents being assassinated or attempted assassination. We got John F. Kennedy, we got Abraham Lincoln. Allegedly Zachary Taylor was poisoned. I don't know if they resolved that or not. And attacks on Congress people, attacks on, this seems to be a little bit violent for a country that is a leader in democracy,
Well, one of the disturbing aspects of it is even if the acts are in political terms random, the reactions to those acts are not. And it is disconcerting to see, for example, when the husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was attacked in a really brutal and grotesque way, the reaction on the part of the former president and on the part of many of his supporters was one of a weird kind of derision and conspiracy theorizing and so forth, and a complete failure of empathy. And so what we're seeing a lot of in these days is a failure of empathy, and indeed an idea that, as some people have said, that the cruelty is the point. And so it's that I find more disturbing than the specific acts, which, as I say, a country of 330 million people with 20,000 roughly homicides per year, to read anything specific into particular acts can turn out to be a mistake.
Yeah. when we, and you brought up a very good issue. We have quite a bit of crimes in America comparing to other nations. First world countries, that is that really seeping into the political scene, or just the political scene is too sizzling?
Well, the proliferation of guns, and particularly the kinds of guns at issue here, and of course, the one thing that people are going to seize on for those who are activists along these lines, is the AR-15. And the reason why people feel the need in the society to arm themselves with that kind of weapon is itself a source of some consternation here. And it ranges, again, many people collect guns for various reasons or use them for sporting purposes. But there is also a deep-seated paranoia that causes people to want to accumulate these kinds of weapons. And as the political temperature rises, the interaction of that gun culture with political circumstances is potentially very trouble.
Recently I was looking at, I think Switzerland, per person, I think they have more guns than Americans, and we don't hear about violence like that. It's amazing, I mean, we're not only country with guns, but we seem to, you know, to use it differently.
Well, we certainly have a very different kind of society than exists in Switzerland and a very different set of traditions surrounding guns. But again, there's just this wide range of social influences that unfortunately may come together in a perfect storm that will lead to extremely regrettable outcomes.
You know, luckily this time, the president was not harmed, and we pray for his recovery and we pray for his family. But the rhetoric you mentioned, we have January 6th, we have the president, the former president, that is, saying that if he is not elected, it's going to be a bloodbath and so forth and so on. Did that contribute to the atmosphere that we're dealing with today?
Well, certainly it contributes to the overall reactions. Again, not necessarily to the acts of this gunman. But yeah, and words like bloodbath, it's important not to take things out of context. Former President Trump wasn't promising that he would initiate a bloodbath if he wasn't elected. His point was about the impacts on the auto industry at that moment. But the use of the term bloodbath was nonetheless significant because, again, this is a matter of raising the stakes. That if you think that the outcome of political contestation is potentially catastrophe, then you would be willing to take whatever measures are needed to avert it. And the iconic moment of this actually is in 2016, the publication of a piece by Michael Anton called "The Flight 90 Election," where Anton writing under a pseudonym at the time, took the position that the election of Hillary Clinton would eventually be a civilization-ending kind of experience. And that sort of mentality leads, as has been observed even by conservative writers, leads to the kind of thought processes that rationalize the events of January 6th, 2021. And so this is something to be greatly concerned about.
You mentioned something earlier, and I want to expand on it as well, which is the reaction to such rhetoric. And that's what surprises me. And I remember when Senator Graham was talking about if certain things didn't happen, then there'll be violence. And basically nobody reacted to that. I mean, and I'm not saying that Senator Graham of North Carolina was advocating violence, but to just say that in such a way where, just like, if we're hungry, we get some food. I mean, this must be a serious thing instead of just saying it, mere mentioning it. I would think the reaction should have been a lot more severe.
Well, yes, you point out the kind of normalization of that sort of rhetoric is itself something that kind of accustoms people to the idea that perhaps invoking force in response to political outcomes is something that's appropriate. And we see public opinion polls showing that a substantial number of Americans do believe that it would be justified to use violence in response to particular outcomes. More of those people are on the political right, but there's a substantial chunk of those people who are on other parts of the political spectrum as well. And so, of course, in the abstract, we don't ordinarily reject the notion that extreme political circumstances would justify violence. Our iconic piece of literature in the Anglo-American tradition on politics is John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, which makes reference to the appeal to heaven, a term that we've heard invoked more recently, having to do with a flag that Mrs. Alito, the wife of the Supreme Court justice, seemed to have affection for. But this sort of normalization of rhetoric is particularly of concern. But you think back to the events of 2009-10 and the emergence of the Tea Party movement. Why was it called that? Well, as one person put it, party like it's 1773. The notion that what's happened is that a particular approach to politics that has become, from the standpoint of people on the hard right, dominant in this country, that they've been promising to eradicate over and over again and have failed to, even when Republicans have won elections. This leads to the notion in 2009, 2010, that what we have here is a fundamental illegitimacy in the exercise of power. It's not just that measures to mitigate economic inequality, material insecurity, and social stratification are bad policy to be dealt with through ordinary processes of elections and courts and so forth. It's rather that this is tyranny. And that people need to mobilize against tyranny. And so the invocation of the language of the Tea Party is really only one step away from the idea of the use of violence to overthrow tyranny. And that's where the mentality of some part of the population is. It's also, of course, very important to recognize that what's politically consequential, and certainly electorally consequential, is not what the overheated figures on the extremes have to say about things, but rather their ability to make what seems, at least superficially to people, as a compelling case to those who are much more mainstream in their attitudes. And so if people who are more mainstream in their attitudes come to be persuaded that, in fact, maybe there's something to this idea that tyranny is upon us, then you start to have a critical mass of support for actions that are, to put it mildly, extra constitutional. And of course, we've seen with January 6th that something that we might have thought in the immediate aftermath of that occasion would be something that people would overwhelmingly be repelled by, would reject. We're starting to see a certain level of respectability creep in here. And of course, former President Trump's rallies have included the Star Spangled Banner rendition by the January 6th chorus, the prisoners speaking, singing through a telephone. And so turning these people into martyrs. And that, of course, portends, once again, the erosion of mediating institutions of the society that make it possible for people to feel that it's safe to lose elections, that the foundations of political life are secure, irrespective of momentary outcomes. If people cease to think that, then you start to have people considering the legitimacy of other kinds of responses.
Dr. Roth, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Please stay tuned.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most. And make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
Hey, Michigan drivers. Are you sending or answering group chats behind the wheel, checking emails at the light, calling family or friends on the commute? Michigan's hands-free law makes it illegal to manually use electronic devices while behind the wheel of a vehicle. Breaking the law could mean fines or even community service. Go hands-free, just drive. It's the law. Learn more at michigan.gov/distracted driving. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Welcome back and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hashim. We're talking to Dr. Roth in regard to political violence. Dr. Roth, the acceptance of violence, I remember a long time ago, I don't recall what year it was, when Dan Quayle, Vice President Dan Quayle, talked about the possible of using depleted uranium in one of the attacks. I think it's either in Iraq or Syria. There was like a huge outcry about that. And recently, Senator Graham talks about nuke in Gaza, and it's okay because America did nuke Japan. A Michigan legislator also talked about something similar to that, and there was like nobody even cared, and the media didn't pick it up and didn't really talk much about it. Are we becoming more like it's okay for things like this to happen and becoming like a culture of violence, basically?
Yes, well, we're returning to an era that we thought we'd left behind, and so it's interesting from my perspective as an international law scholar that in the 1990s, where so much of the scholarship of the current period still has its origins, the Cold War had just ended. Remember, people used to talk about the peace dividend. There was a sense that if we had not perhaps reached the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama notoriously put it, in a way that is often misinterpreted, we had reached a point where certain kinds of workings out of political contradictions had kind of reached a kind of resting point, that we were looking ahead to an era of peace. It was also a period, of course, in the 1990s where conflict after conflict that had seemed completely irresolvable had come to be resolved. Remember the civil war in El Salvador, which had gone on for almost a decade and a half. Remember the troubles in Northern Ireland, which went on for 29 years. Remember the resolution of apartheid in South Africa and the election of Nelson Mandela. And of course, the collapse of the regimes of East Central Europe. So we had over and over again in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and in various kinds of countries, in very different cultural and ideological settings, these kinds of transformations, most of them mostly peaceful. And so we seem to be turning the page from routine violence as a means of resolving political conflict to other kinds of mechanisms. And what we're seeing very broadly is the breakdown of those mechanisms. And more alarmingly, and this is something I might have anticipated some of those breakdowns, but what I did not anticipate was that countries that were notoriously stable, that had long constitutional traditions, with relatively few interruptions of constitutional rule, have started to experience a surge of support for extra-constitutional solutions and a surge of popularity for a new kind of what's sometimes called populist. That's not necessarily that, but new kinds of thinking, particularly on the right, that resemble the kinds of political movements going back to the 20s, 30s, and 40s in Europe. That was something I thought for sure we had left behind. And the resurgence of that augurs again, raising the stakes of politics in a very troubling manner.
It is. It is. You know, looking at someone who spent years and years and years in media and journalism, looking at national media, I don't, it doesn't look like national media is playing an essential role in moving the conversation in the right direction. And the existing of social media and easy access, people to access each other and spread their own ideas and their own conspiracies and all of that swirling around is not really helping change it, taking us in the right direction.
Well, you remember all of the optimism surrounding the Arab Spring and sense that the transformation in Egypt was largely brought about by social media. Whether that's entirely true is a little bit unclear, but there was this general sense that there was an irrepressible democratic urge that governments would not be able to suppress as social media proliferated, and that this was going to be a great thing for political participation and accountability and all sorts of aspects that we associate with the word democracy. And what we've seen in recent years is that at minimum, these kinds of mechanisms can be used in radically different ways to undermine democratic institutions. And I think what we've seen more than anything is a tendency for political rhetoric and discourse more broadly to cease to be a means by which of convincing people of an argument, or to be, if not mere self-expression, really a means of mobilizing people who already agree. And if the nature of discourse is just mobilizing people, then the more extreme, the better. Then the more alarming, the better. The more that you can inculcate in people's sense of urgency, often accomplished through inculcating fear, and outrage, of course. That there's an incentive for that, and that incentive again is part of the toxic brew if you've got a well-armed country that has all manner of social divisions. So it's something to be concerned about.
Yeah. As a political scientist, I'm sure you're watching this. When I look at the scale, which is we used to have left and right, and it seems that the whole scale has shifted way to the right. Even what used to be right now is like looks left. Do you see it that way?
In some respects, yes, but then in other respects, viewed from a different perspective, there are a lot of things that have been moving leftward. They're not the sorts of things that many of us have focused on in the past, and so a lot of it is a matter of cultural shift. And this has, of course, fed into a kind of destabilizing narrative here, where many people feel that the ground is shifting out from under them, that the culture is somehow out of control. All of these things are happening, which are unexpected and change the terms of social and cultural life in ways that a substantial part of the country is uncomfortable with. And so those people then can be recruited, those people who are made uncomfortable by those changes can be recruited for right-wing causes, often of a more traditional or even retrograde sort. And so people find themselves aligned with various different agendas, and that I think is something that you see in terms of former President Trump's base of support, where there's really a wide range of the types of people who are drawn to it. Some of which sort of harkens back to older movements like the people who supported George Wallace in the 1960s and 70s. But at the same time, you have other kinds of people who would never be caught dead in that crowd, who nonetheless find themselves at least willing to vote for people who are associated with those kinds of movements because their own insecurities have been triggered by some of the cultural developments that have occurred.
In the past 10 years or so, I've noticed that different organizations are using courts to address issues that normally comes out of Congress. And then there was the movement where we've seen like kind of rebellious kind of against this system. Are Americans in general losing faith in the system that we have?
Well, they may be losing faith in the courts. One of the peculiar things about American politics is the weight that judicial review of legislation has in our society. That on the one hand, we talk about popular participation in government and accountability, and on the other hand, we have unelected judges who exercise the power to overrule legislation. And for a substantial period of time, people who think of themselves as progressive were very favorable to the idea of judicial review of legislation, largely because majoritarianism in politics can often close out groups that are on the margins, groups that are disempowered, groups that for one reason or other have an inadequate voice in the political process. And we've seen judges as the guardians of fundamental principles that have redressed the gaps in the way that majoritarianism sort of fails to effectuate genuine political equality. But there's always been the fundamental problem that when you empower judges who are by their very the very design of the institutions unaccountable and not in any way subject to sort of genuine popular input into decision making, that you don't know how these things are going to go. The history of judicial review of legislation in the United States is much more checkered than people realize. We tend to think that normality in this regard is the period from 1954 to choose your time frame. But the Brown versus Board of Education inaugurated, in some sense, a new era of a progressive embrace of judicial review. And particularly in the period of the Warren Court from 1953 to 1969, you saw all of these path-breaking reinterpretations of constitutional norms, which sought to effectuate greater equality and greater liberty for outgroups of one sort or other in the society. There's been pushback to that, starting gradually in the period of the Burger Court, immediately following when Richard Nixon was able to appoint 4 justices to the Supreme Court. Many of the basic accomplishments of the Warren Court have been sort of secured from being assailed. People have tended to accept these as basic premises of even what the Constitution means. And then all of a sudden, we start to have a court that is looking to go back, looking to revisit all of the fundamental premises of the last half century or so of jurisprudence. And that is a big shock to people, but it shouldn't necessarily be a shock to people, given how unaccountable that branch of government is, and given its history. People forget, for example, that the 1875 Civil Rights Act, the first major piece of civil rights legislation that dealt with discrimination by private actors, was overruled by the Supreme Court in 1883. And so the civil rights cases decision, the worst Supreme Court decision you've never heard of, is sort of emblematic of what can happen when a court that's to the right of the political process seeks to strike down progressive legislation. Similarly, in 1905, a case called Lochner versus New York, that's known to all students of constitutional law, was the constitutionalization of laissez-faire economics. It was striking down labor regulation. It was striking down efforts by legislatures to try to tamper with markets in service of those who lacked market power. And from 1905 to 1937, the court was very active in striking down legislation that sought to be protective of the rights of workers and of other vulnerable participants in the economy. And it wasn't until rather late in the New Deal, when there was what was referred to as the switch in time that saved the nine, that changed things. And it saved the nine because the Roosevelt administration, at wit's end over the obstructionism of the Supreme Court, was flirting with the idea of packing the court. And so again, we start to hear talk about packing the court now as the only means to overcome the obstacles that are being now placed by a newly right of center, let us say, orientation of the court.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the two things actually. The recent ruling by the judge the other day to dismiss the case against former President Trump, and then the Supreme Court ruling in regard to immunity. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break. Please stay tuned.
Ziyad brand, quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
What's my ETA?
Your estimated time of arrival is 9:17.
I'm late. I'll have to punch it.
Speeding will save you just 1 minute and 36 seconds. It will also increase your risk of a crash, as well as the odds that you will be stopped and issued an expensive speeding ticket.
Yeah, but...
In 1 year, there were 22,000 speeding-related crashes in Michigan, resulting in 200 deaths.
If I had someone in the car with me, I'd drive slower. But it's just me.
This is not a logical response. Though you have no passenger, surrounding cars contain 27 others, including 5 children and 1 Labrador Retriever.
How do you know all this stuff?
I know everything, Kevin.
Your risk of a crash increases with every mile you drive over the speed limit. So slow down. Speed enforcement is happening now. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. Before we went on break, we were talking about the judicial branch, and I was really surprised, Dr. Roth, the other day to hear that the judge in the secret documents case would dismiss the case against former President Trump. The timing sounds kind of suspicious. Why now? When after what happened, the attempted assassination, and after apparently former President Trump becomes the nominee for the for the presidency on the Republican side. It sounds kind of fishy a little bit. It just why now? Why wait till now to do that? Is this a judge that was appointed by President Trump at the time, and did she feel like he may come after me?
I don't think that the timing is fishy. I think the substance is fishy. So the problem here has been over time that it seems as though Judge Cannon has been trying to place every possible obstacle in the way of the prosecution, and particularly seemingly to delay. Whether the delay is deliberately for the sake of letting the former president reach the golden moment of the November election without having to face these charges in court is speculative. But there has been a remarkable slowness about Judge Cannon's approach to these questions. But then, quite strikingly, this ruling, which comes out of nowhere, that the special prosecutor was unconstitutionally appointed. This would be, one might say, a path-breaking judgment. There's a long way to go with this because it will have to go through appeals, including presumably to the Supreme Court. If it actually does get upheld by the U.S. Court of Appeals, this would be a fundamental change. We've had special prosecutors for a long time. Going back, of course, this is how the Richard Nixon's presidency was brought down. We had the greatest constitutional crisis of my lifetime in October of 1973 with the so-called Saturday Night Massacre, when the president sought to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. This has been taken as a given as part of our rule of law structure, that the way in which the Justice Department can insulate itself from any accusation of being run by the president or run by the White House is to have the investigation cordoned off, put within a special unit within the Justice Department that can be guaranteed independence. And so if we're going to throw that out, then we're going to throw everything out. And it also dovetails with this very strange aspect of the immunity decision, which I know you want to come to.
Sure.
There's much that's wrong with the immunity decision, but the most stunning thing in the immunity decision is the way in which the court majority characterizes as part of the core functions of the president this collaboration with the attorney general over whom and what to prosecute. And so particularly if you think that the attorney general is an appendage of the president, which again is something that violates fundamentally all of the traditions of not only our Justice Department, but the general liberal democratic conception of the rule of law. If you throw that out and you throw out the idea that the Justice Department can create a special prosecution unit that's insulated from those kinds of political influences, then you get a really problematic picture of how we could ever have legal accountability in the exercise of power.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about it, the immunity, to go back to the immunity issue. Before I do that, I was just thinking now that you're saying, if I had gone to the White House as a citizen and taken without permission a paper clip, I think I would have been in jail. And here's a president who took classified documents, refused to give them, misplaced them, and now it's dismissed. It seems like the scales are different, and then the immunity ruling of the Supreme Court. Help us understand. I mean, does this really make the president a dictator? He can do whatever he wants?
Not exactly. There are two different, if related, kinds of theories about executive power. One is substantive and the other is procedural. So the immunity one is procedural, and it has to do only with the status of the president. And so the idea here is that the action itself may be illegal, and indeed that subordinates who follow illegal orders may be subject to criminal liability. However, the courts are disabled as a matter of the constitutional balance of powers in the separation. The courts are disabled from holding the person of the president criminally liable. And so that's really what this is about. It's important to note that we have not ordinarily looked at the criminal liability of the president in his person, as being fundamental to the checks and balances of the republic. We've obviously never prosecuted a president or former president before. Richard Nixon had to be pardoned. Interestingly, Richard Nixon would not have needed a pardon under the current interpretation here. But what's remarkable too is that it's not just, this is a status immunity on the one hand. It has to do only with the person holding the office, not the substance of the act being committed. But on the other hand, it applies to the former holder of the status. Which is very unusual for a status immunity. There are other kinds of immunity that go to the substance. But this kind of immunity would ordinarily expire at the moment that the person leaves office, and instead the court has seemingly just kind of making this up. There's nothing in the constitutional text that suggests this. Indeed, quite the contrary. They've come to this idea that, well, we need to protect former presidents from the revenge prosecutions of subsequent presidents. And we're going to provide this kind of protection for former presidents for almost everything. The court tries to carve out in principle some kinds of possibilities for criminal liabilities, but basically any charge of abuse of power by a former president is going to be immune from criminal prosecution. The president commits vehicular homicide, or the president commits sexual assault, or something like that, that will be clearly an unofficial act where the president could to prosecution. But we're not usually concerned about the private acts of presidents in this regard. Anyway, we're concerned about abuses of power, and those seem to be completely shielded. Now, there's another aspect of views about executive power, which people who are inclined to the one may be inclined to the other, and this is more troubling. This is the idea that sometimes goes under the heading of the unitary executive theory, but I call it the unitary executive theory on steroids. It is a kind of deviant view about Article 2 powers, the powers, constitutional powers of the president. That says that whereas the Congress is vested in Article 1 with the powers herein granted, that Article 2 confers the executive power on the president, and the executive power is undefined. And the idea on the part of some people is, well, what it really is the executive aspect of the sovereignty of the United States. And so it may indeed be possible that, as Richard Nixon notoriously said in that David Frost interview in the late 1970s, that when the president does it, it's not illegal. That's not a crackpot idea. It's not a gaffe. It was, in fact, articulated very carefully by John Ehrlichman in the Watergate hearings in colloquies with Senator Sam Ervin and Senator Herman Talmadge, in which he sought to defend the break-in at Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office by the so-called plumbers, this unit that eventually was used in the Nixon campaign, but that had been just kind of an off-the-shelf group assembled by the Nixon White House, supposedly to plug leaks, or at least to punish people who were supposed to be responsible for leaks. These people had broken into this doctor's office to try to get information to smear a political dissident. And the idea was that, well, actually, the Constitution establishes for the president the unilateral and uncontrollable determination of what is necessary for the national security of the United States. And therefore, that even the break-in at the psychiatrist's office could be understood as being within that. That idea, sometimes you go from the sublime to the ridiculous. This goes from the ridiculous to the sublime. So in the period of the George W. Bush administration, we have notoriously what are referred to as the torture memos. And these were memoranda produced by the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, particularly by John Yoo, a professor of law at the University of California at Berkeley. And these memos make the case for executive power along very much the same lines, to the point where if torture is a crime, according to Professor Yoo, the idea is that crime cannot apply to the acts of the president because the president has the last word on determining what's appropriate to defend the nation against terrorism if a terror suspect is in custody and may be holding back information vital to national security. This idea that there is this unaccountable repository of executive power is very much an idea that's alive. And that the immunity decision doesn't establish this by any means. It doesn't go to that set of questions, but the kinds of people who would come to this conclusion about immunity might also come to that conclusion about the Article 2 powers. And that really would place the executive above the law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, as you well know, it seems like it depends on how far the president wants to take his power. And I remember an interview with former President Trump, and the reporter was asking, how could you mock a handicapped person talking and then treat the press like that? And he says, I'm the president of the United States. I can do whatever I want, basically. And if somebody with that mentality comes in at the time when there's immunity, that kind of, when I think of America, I think this country where everybody is treated equally before the law. And when I hear that and I say, well, wait a second, he's a president, he can do whatever he wants, I can't do it, there is no equality here. It really shakes the belief of what America is.
Well, and particularly the notion of the rule of law, which is a different idea than law and order. The rule of law is about who guards the guardians. It's about the idea that the exercise of power everywhere and always has to be subject to legal constraint and no exercise of power except according to law. But we have, of course, former President Trump has clearly articulated this idea with respect to war crimes, where he has, when being confronted with the idea that his suggestions would violate laws about the conduct of armed conflict, he said, well, the people would follow his orders.
Yeah.
So he's very much committed in principle to the idea of being able to authorize war crimes. He's also talked in very crass terms about roughing up suspects, criminal suspects by the police. He's also, of course, in his rallies encouraged violence on the part of his supporters in a very overt way. And you remember during the debate last time around when he talked about the various kind of paramilitary groups that were loyal to him, and he stand back and stand by.
Exactly.
Well, what the heck does that mean?
Absolutely. What we're going to do is we're going to take a final break. Please stay tuned.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Najee Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Najee Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Najee Abood, 734-744-9796.
In a perfect world, everyone would be a perfect driver.
Hands at 9 and 3, everyone.
9 and 3.
Everyone would follow all the rules.
Please, go ahead and merge. I'll make room.
Thank you, fellow driver.
And nothing unexpected would ever happen. Even the squirrels would know the right time to safely cross the road. In this perfect world, you wouldn't have to wear a seatbelt. But in case you hadn't noticed, we don't live in a perfect world. About 1,000 people in Michigan die each year in vehicle crashes, and thousands more are injured. Wearing your seatbelt reduces your risk of death in a crash by 45% in a car and by 60% in a pickup truck. So until we find a perfect world to drive in, make our imperfect world safer by buckling up. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American Board Certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hashim. We're talking to Dr. Roth from the Wayne State University. Dr. Roth, it seems like the world doesn't look at America the same way. I was talking to a colleague of mine from overseas, and he said, we were hoping that you teach us democracy. It seems that we're teaching you corruption. Now the president can do whatever he wants and look at attempt political assassination and all of that. These things, are they really tarnishing America's image?
I think so, but I think one needs to take the broader view again of the history of the United States in the world. We have this romanticized view that America is a light unto the nations and all of this. And, it wasn't that long ago, after all, that the Nazis looked to study our Jim Crow laws to provide a model for how they were going to deal with their own minorities. I mean, the United States has a very checkered history with respect to a wide range of things. When the human rights movement began, one of the peculiarities was that although the United States was a leading force behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, it immediately turned its back on the project of establishing international human rights treaties. And in fact, in the 1950s, there was almost a constitutional amendment that would have disabled the United States from much of its treaty practice. And in order to avoid that constitutional amendment, President Eisenhower promised to refrain from bringing the United States into international human rights treaties. And in fact, we were not. But believe it or not, the first human rights treaty that the United States ever joined was the Genocide Convention in the late 1980s under Ronald Reagan. And it wasn't really until the end of the Cold War that we became a player in human rights treaties. We joined the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but subject to a whole raft of reservations, understandings, and declarations to carve out for ourselves all kinds of exceptions. Similarly with the Torture Convention and the Racial Discrimination Convention, and then those are the only ones. We've not been part of the broader human rights movement. We are the only country in the world that's not a party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We are not a party to the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and you can go on and on with that. So the United States is not exactly in the forefront of sort of peace, freedom, democracy, human rights, and in quite the way that people like to imagine. That's not to say that there are reasons for all of these things. There's a complicated picture, but the idealization of the United States is a little bit idiosyncratic and has been presented by American leaders to the American populace in a way that's been somewhat manipulative.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I can't let you go without asking you, as a political scientist and you follow elections, with the attempted assassination, how would that help the race for former President Trump?
Well, it's anyone's guess, but one thing that's been noteworthy about the polls is how little they have changed over the course of a long period of events. And so even the stumbling debate performance by President Biden doesn't seem to have shifted the polls by more than a few points. That said, a few points is enough, and especially in the swing states like Michigan. And so one can imagine that this is going to generate, this event's going to generate more enthusiasm on the part of supporters of the former president. I don't know that it's going to pull in a lot of people from the middle toward him. But one of the things that's a little concerning is that he demonstrates a certain kind of vigor that seems to be lacking in the current president. And you have to give him credit for this, that the image at the moment that he was being taken off the stage really presented him as someone who embodied strength and boldness. And that's appealing to a lot of people. And if that's the last image that people are left with leading into the November elections, that's some reason to think that this will go well for him. But there's a lot of time between now and then. We keep on being stunned by new events occurring almost weekly. And so stay tuned.
Do you think President Biden should step down?
Yes, I do. I think that he's really demonstrated that he just isn't up to the task of communicating what needs to be communicated during the campaign, and everyone is watching him now. Even if he gets it right from this point on, they're watching for the next misstep, and there's always going to be some sort of superficial misstep. He referred to Zelensky as Putin the other day. I mean, just these things that really are not significant, but they represent, I think, really is at this point preclusive of him being reelected. And so I would like to see him step down, as I know a lot of other people would.
Dr. Brad Roth, Professor of Law and Political Science at Wayne State University. As always, we thank you for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you for a great production. I would like to thank all our listeners, and we continue to, pray for America, for quick recovery of former President Donald Trump. Violence has no place in political violence. We hope that we'll see less and less of it, and has really no place of it. I hope that both candidates will tone it down and use this as a wake-up moment that we don't need this. Let's focus on the issues. Let's focus what's important for America and for everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Roth. Thank you, Mike, for great production. Bye now.